Maybe Wayne, we'll start with you, because it's something that you'll be talking to your clients a lot about. I imagine have been doing so for the last 18 months or so, is the impact of COVID-19. Obviously, we had lockdowns last year and there was a major impact on business then. What about now? We've had revised conditions for COVID-19 in place for quite some time now. What do you see the conditions on the ground in PNG right now as far as COVID-19 is concerned?
Thanks, Andrew. I think the biggest impacts really of COVID have been a few of them. One is for businesses to engage with their staff. Certainly initially last year when there were lots of people working from home, and I don't think things are still entirely back to normal. The challenges are, keeping everyone motivated, keeping engaged with your clients and your teams, and really just trying to work out how to work in new and changed conditions. Other factors are probably, from our side, increase in cyber risk, with a lot of people working more remotely, working of different locations. You've got to make sure that your cyber security is very tight. So that has been a challenge. I think that staff mobility has also been an issue, particularly where you've got a need for specialist skilled staff that you would ordinarily bring from outside PNG into PNG for short-term engagements. But those are challenging, and those challenges are likely to remain for some time. Also, you see it in Australia now, in the professional services world, the lack of staff mobility is sort of leading to cost pressures there to retain staff, where you would ordinarily get a natural inflow of people. The people around the world are more fixed, so staff mobility and international labor mobility is short. And those are the main COVID impacts. I think what's becoming an issue now, not necessarily for any one particular company, is the vaccination and vaccination hesitancy, and how companies and businesses and organizations are going to deal with staff that choose not to be vaccinated. There's a bit more activity in that area, and that will create some challenges for businesses, particularly probably larger businesses with more employees.
Welcome, Robin. And you can hear me all right?
Yes, thanks, Dan.
Good to see you.
Thank you.
BSP runs the largest branch network in the country, and you're also the largest Kina lender, so the lender of local currency in the market. What sort of impact has there been on BSP's lending business? What is it telling you about the stress that business is going under at this time, or not going under?
Well, certainly from an overall lending perspective, the market itself, not just BSP, but across all the banks, has contracted somewhat over the last 18 to 20 months, which is not unexpected, giving regard to some of the economic impact of the social and movement restrictions which have emerged in that immediate post-COVID environment, as Wayne talked about. So we've seen a lot of flat revenue, net profitability has been challenged for certain sectors in particular, and that's meant that overall lending opportunities have reduced across the board. From a BSP perspective, when you do have quite a large portfolio, you'd expect to also need to appreciate and understand that the amortisation, that can be across a 5 to 6 year period. Hence, every month you've probably got to write best part of 100 to 120 million Kina in loans. So there's still a lot of activity, but the activity in itself isn't sufficient to reflect that business has the confidence on the next level of investment which is required. And to some degree, that's probably going to be in relation to a number of those key resource projects. We've got commitments from government, commitments from infrastructure partners. It's just around the timing.
Noted. Ian, NAS Fund is known as the private sector super fund, although of course you have members right across the economy. One of the provisions that was put in place quite early on was the ability of people to maybe draw down from their super balances. What's actually been the results, and has that shown what the impact of COVID-19 has been on the economy as far as your members' withdrawals from the fund?
Thank you, Andrew. before I answer the question, I just want to say thank you to you and the organizers for putting this forum together. And I just want to say good morning to my fellow panelists as well. So good morning, Robin.
Morning.
Wayne and Robin.
Morning. Hi.
Thanks, Ian.
So just, with respect to COVID and its impacts, as you heard from Wayne and Robin, it was an unexpected phenomenon. There was no script available to guide us as to how we should react, firstly from a government level, and then trickling all the way through to business and then our communities. With regard to superannuation and our members, the structure of superannuation here is under the legislation, members can access their contributions if they're unemployed after 3 months of leaving employment. That's one of the inherent features of superannuation. So with the onslaught of COVID and the reaction by a number of our employers, especially those in the private sector and certainly those ones that contribute to the fund, rationalizing the workforce was one of the steps that was taken to keep operations going. And as a consequence, that had a flow-on effect to employees and especially those that were members of the fund. So one of the interventions that was put by government in consultation with the super funds in Papua New Guinea was a look at the legislation that govern the funds, the Superannuation General Provisions Act, and there was an amendment to Section 90, essentially allowing members access to their funds if they lost their job as a direct consequence of COVID, and addition that had to be made by the employers as a consequence of COVID. In terms of the mechanics of it, members under that amendment would have been allowed up to 10,000 kina from their own contribution, or 20% of their own contribution, whichever was the greater amount. Unfortunately, even though that process had taken place, it has not been operationalized because the amendment of the Act has not been gazetted. In terms of impact, those that required their funds eventually had access to their funds after being out of job for 3 months, and then the normal provisions of the Act took its course. In terms of impact, overall, we've seen an increase in withdrawals, and that's just a testimony to the employment situation here in country. It's a challenge, and all our visitors acknowledge that. We are cognizant of that. So it's just one of those factors that we have to deal with. Moving forward, how do we retain, or how do we ensure that superannuation is not accessed as the first means of resort? And obviously the other activities or considerations about SMEs and so forth, opportunities that may exist if one leaves formal employment. So whilst it's a challenge, there also are opportunities out there. And that's something that our team has taken on board in terms of exit planning, and having a conversation with individuals that have been impacted, and we've seen quite a few come through. Closure of program mine is a classical case.
Yes.
The aviation sector, they've had to wind down because our flights internationally closed, so that impacted a lot of those employees in that sector. Those that had already attained retirement, basically early retirement. So challenges, but also opportunities for individuals as well.
Noted, Ian. Thank you. There was an observation that maybe while PNG has been impacted, as everywhere else has been, by COVID-19, that conditions on the ground now are surprisingly stable PNG hasn't seen the massive lockdowns, for example, as some of the neighbouring economies have. How would you characterise the new Pela Passin, if you will, Robin, as far as the day-to-day operations in PNG are concerned right now for your business?
Like most employers, it does take a couple of aspects. There's the normal personal protection. We have to have the masks, people coming into the branches, the sanitisers, how we deal and interact with our customers in particular. And as we've seen in recent days and recent weeks, for employers to try to strike that balance between ensuring we're protecting our workforce and our customers without necessarily trying to be too overt and stringent in the way that we address vaccinations. And there is a question there about vaccination, and it's one that challenges all business leaders and should be challenging all individuals. As an entity which has businesses across multiple countries, we've been able to see different approaches from different governments as to how to deal with vaccines, and equally the unfortunate correlation between low death rates and high vaccine hesitancy. Even in Australia, the states which have the lowest transmission rates, the ones which are more hesitant about getting the vaccine because they can't see that immediate compelling need to get a vaccination. Now, we all know all the myths which are going on as well, and part of it is to have a good, structured, logical approach to ensuring that employees are vaccinated. Fiji's had it mandated, and Fiji, because it's a country which is reliant on international tourism, they see that compelling requirement to reduce the reliance on government debt and to have some inward flows by getting tourism back up and running. Solomon Islands has taken a similar approach, mandating vaccinations. Can be difficult in PNG, but it's certainly got to be various segments of the economy which are reliant upon having a good and healthy workforce. We've got to have a far more proactive approach, understand all the logistics around getting vaccines to various parts of the regions and the provinces as well. So getting the vaccinations, whether it's a Johnson & Johnson, which is a once only, and could perhaps reduce the need for the records management, which is required with multiple doses, but equally businesses, health workers themselves, politicians and others leading and ensuring that we understand the need, not just at a local community level, but from an overall PNG development level, to be able to have people moving freely into PNG. And we probably don't realise how many of our students are still overseas and they can't get back. How many of our relatives, not just the expats, how many of our Papua New Guinean relatives are overseas and they can't get back. So to ensure that we are a tourist destination, that we can position ourselves to take advantage of those future LNG developments and mining developments, we have to have a better approach and a more consistent approach, particularly within the formal workforce, to vaccinations.
Noted. Wayne, just following on from Robin's comments about the movement of people across borders, that's something that's we've already anecdotally hearing is delaying some projects in Papua New Guinea because people just are finding it difficult to travel to and fro. What are you hearing as far as the management of moving skilled labour in and out of the country?
Well, thanks, Andrew. I think, at a certain level, in terms of skilled labour, there's very often much of it that can be done remotely. There is, where you need, for example, you can log in remotely and interact remotely in certain areas. I think certain technical and there's certain aspects where you simply just can't manage that remotely. I mean, the mining sector is the obvious one. You need your workers specialist skills to come in and out. And as I say, I think looking to the future, you'll find perhaps more skilled contracts, secondments of people in country rather than bringing people in and out. So the travel restrictions are the biggest impact there.
Noted. I'm wondering, COVID aside, and maybe Ian, if you wouldn't mind answering this question, COVID aside, what other factors do you think are particularly impacting the investment climate in Papua New Guinea at the moment? I'm thinking such things, for example, as maybe the delay in resources projects getting off the ground, or some of the other factors that might be in play in the economy separate from COVID-19?
Yes, Andrew, well, PNG, as we all know, has been operating in distressed conditions for a number of years now. I think going back 4 or 5 years. So even before impact of COVID, there were already challenges that the country was facing. And of course, talk about the resource projects in Penyang and the Papua LNG, and then of course Wafi Golpu. You know, those resource projects were were anticipated certainly by business and I think the country as a whole. As a catalyst, to get things started, and then it would then underpin the flow-on effects that would be associated with that. The support services, the financing requirements, obviously creation of employment and so forth. And unfortunately, those projects haven't kicked off. There's been progress in terms of discussions and to where we are, and that's a positive, that's a light at the end of the tunnel, but it's coming down to a timing issue. So I think the challenge, and again, where there's challenge, there's opportunities, is rather than just wait for those projects to get off the ground, then what other areas of the economy can be looked at to get things going. I think there was an earlier presentation by MD of IPA, Clarence, and he mentioned a couple of initiatives that government had introduced. For example, the economic zones or free tax zones to encourage FDI coming in. So those are some good initiatives, but of course it takes time. It takes time for those those initiatives to unfold and then obviously to have the kind of impacts that we all want to see in PNG. But I think just taking a step backwards, it's probably a good time now to stop and not just look at the extractives, the mining and the extractive and the non-renewable as the means of long-term development for PNG. I think the time now is to look. There's other areas of the economy that need to look at. Agriculture, for example, where 80% of our people are located. Import substitution, for example. I hear that the country imports about 300 million kina worth of imports that, if given the right environment, the right policy framework, we can replace. And then I think immediately of dairy farming. I had the opportunity to be up in ECPIC and looking at some of the initiatives that are going on up there in terms of dairy. We have one here in Port Moresby, just outside at 14 Mile, and the products that are going and hitting our shelves at the retail shops. Those are some of the initiatives that if given appropriate support and obviously funding, that's a push away from the mining and extractors. But I think first things first, Andrew, is looking and using this downtime to reset and reposition. Yes, we are challenged with revenue. That's a constraint by government. But with initiatives like the free trade and then just domestically within the country, the institutions that have good mobilization of domestic capital, we can utilize some of those to kickstart economy. So again, like everything else, where there's some adversity, there's also opportunity for prosperity if we are looking in the right areas. Is this the right time, given a stressed situation and then impacted again by COVID? And that's the question we all ask. But rather than just take a step backwards, I think let's just take the bull by the horns and see what we can do, and then work within the environment. Let's face it, COVID is here to stay. Let's just get on with life and let's just move on.
As somebody once said to me recently, Ian, never waste a good crisis.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. So, you know, the glass, you've got to take an approach of glass is half full. Otherwise, you know, what's the point of getting up in the morning and then, you know, doing what we have to do?
Absolutely. Robin, just taking, before we go, I think Ian's raised a very interesting point. I'd like to explore it further about what the other opportunities for growth in the economy are. But before we go there, just a little bit about the foreign exchange situation, if you wouldn't mind. Robin, there's been one nominated as one of the #1 issues for business in PNG this year has been the challenge with obtaining foreign exchange. As we heard from Ed Faber a little bit earlier, the situation does seem to be on the improve. What's your take about what the kind of trajectory is for that foreign exchange situation, and what measures might work to improve the situation in the short to medium term?
And to some degree, the responses are interrelated to the factors which are going to drive economic growth. And if you have a look at the balance of trade, especially trade-related orders that are outstanding at the moment, it's certainly come off a peak from around 12 months ago, come off a peak from around 18 months ago. We've had good and regular interventions from Bank of PNG in the absence of some of the foreign exchange, which would have otherwise been associated with a couple of those key resource developments. Across BSP at the moment, we've got about 300 million kina in orders which sit with us, compared to probably close to 600 or 800 million kina towards the end of last year. And in part, I think we are starting to see that rebalance of the balance of payments flows as economic demand does start to reduce over time, and there's quite a big lag effect. Imports will also start to reduce. As imports reduce, and the overall balance of trade will start to rebalance a little bit more. So we do see that there's the time to complete your normal retail orders is reducing. The overall quantum of outstanding orders has reduced. Clearly, it's not on demand as many businesses would like and which would hope for, but it's starting to get to a level which can be managed a little bit more equitably. But equally, it does need that form of stimulus, which really can only come from the foreign direct investment. And the investment opportunities are the incremental ones which Ian's spoken about, because they also have long lead times. We need to be able to take advantage of opportunities in the agricultural sector. We need to have a look at import replacement. And I know that Saul did sort of touch on import replacements as perhaps a failed approach from the late 80s, but equally what the COVID environment has taught many countries is you need to have food security and you need to have production security. The supply chain issues around the world have affected various businesses and how they're able to obtain the specialist technologies, specialist materials, and even the non-specialist materials, because of impacts with shipping, impacts with production in very long supply chains. Hence, production security, food security are important, but they build up over time. Therefore, if we look at that foreign direct investment, through no fault of either parties, they just need to be progressed somewhat more expeditiously. The government has had good support from many partners. Again, the Australian government touched on a couple of the key support packages that they've been able to provide with the assistance of other support partners, and Papua New Guinea is very thankful and grateful for that. But over time, we need to be in a position where we're able to start to normalise and stabilise that debt to GDP. Again, you look at Fiji's closer to 60, 70, 80% debt to GDP. So the non-reliance on government to stimulate the economy, the foreign direct investment, and also that diversification. We do see that there's certainly a distinct emphasis on getting a couple of those key projects, but at the same time, don't lose focus of the other aspects of economic growth, which are able to provide the longer term and more sustainable factors which will broaden our and diversify our economic activity.
Robin, from where you stand, are you starting to see, forgive the pun, the green shoots, if you like? I know you've been a long-term proponent of increasing PNG's agricultural output, for example, But from BSP's business, are you starting to see developments? On Thursday, for example, we're talking to Sumahesh Patel about what CPL has been doing to improve its relationships with local growers and improve the amount of local produce in their supermarkets. Are you seeing that starting to emerge?
There's certainly specific regions, and Ian touched on one of those regions, which has got vanilla and a lot of investment which is being undertaken in respect of many agricultural projects. We're seeing investment in even the more standard and typical commodities such as copra, investment in production so that copra can be produced in country, the manufacturing, the export can be increased. Cocoa, certainly cocoa is also continuing to grow and be stimulated, but equally it takes a while for those to get to the same level of contributions to GDP as other commodities, particularly the hard commodities. But most certainly we are seeing a lot of activity in certain provinces where there has been a focus on agriculture.
Wayne, what are you seeing from your client base?
I think that just in terms of, I guess, business conditions, not necessarily specifically from our clients, but just in general, that Saul's presentation is very interesting, and I think the challenge, well, the challenge overall is to make PNG more investable, and as Robin said, and you know, the agricultural sector is a good engine for that. Exports are a great engine, but it needs a bit more certainty. You know, capital requires reduced risk. Well, to put capital in requires the risk to be reduced, and that comes through greater certainty. I know Brent asked a question there about M&A activity and whether there was any of that going on and what we're seeing. You're seeing internationally quite a bit more M&A activity, just probably pent up mainly due to COVID. You're seeing, I think we'll see that PNG, as Saul and other people have said, has become more geopolitically important. And so you've seen press about Telstra entering. You've got the Santos Oil Search merger going on, or due diligence, or some activity around that. So there's I think we definitely see a greater focus on the region. We as KPMG have recently formed a South Pacific practice with our Fiji counterparts, so incorporating Fiji, Solomon Islands, and Papua New Guinea. So that goes to show the sort of growing sense of importance that we see in the region. And yeah, so I think that can only be good for potential investment in PNG.
Yeah, Ian, NASFund has its own domestic investments, and you have investments in agriculture right now. What's your appetite for investing in non-resources areas, and what sort of things are you looking for? What makes a good investment in this area as far as you're concerned?
Well, agriculture, Andrew, is providing opportunities for organic growth in terms of members, because there's a lot of activities that are involving people, and with the mindset of encouraging a savings culture. So that's a potential area in terms of capturing more of our Papua New Guineans into the savings net, let alone superannuation. I think from an investment lens, at this time, the fund has taken a very defensive posture and has been for a number of years, obviously because of the environment. So, good investment opportunities are a little bit hard to come by, and there's a heavy weighting at the moment towards a fixed income, which is driven primarily by government paper, who are paying good interest rates. These are the long-term bonds. But as I said earlier on, it's also an opportunity to look at our what we call our asset allocation as mix, and start preparing for a recovery over a longer period of time. So some of the things that we in the fund is looking at investments in infrastructure type assets that one, obviously deliver an economic return in terms of returns on funds deployed and so forth, but two, they have an impact on the nation. So nation building type investments. So things that are of interest at this point in time that are on the radar of our investment team, opportunities in the telecommunications, opportunities in power generation, opportunities in port type infrastructure. So there's a lot of discussions going on there. It's just finding the right model, that will obviously tick the box. And I think, at this time, something when you're talking about those type of infrastructure assets or investment opportunities, it requires a closer collaboration with government. So this is where the conversation on PPP comes in. We always like to talk about, what is a good, successful, story of a PPP arrangement. And BSP is a great story that we use as a benchmark of what can happen with the right mix of government involvement as well as business or private investor that can get together. And, it's a great success story, and credit to Robin and his board and his management for. But it's an example of PPP. So just coming back to what areas or what things are being looked at, it's an opportunity to review the type of investments that will deliver the usual returns, but have an impact on the economy, nation building. So I think just the last point I want to make here as well is that also what COVID has revealed is something that we've been missing, and that's housing for our people.
Yes.
And as you know, the economy, housing is a barometer of activity, and because of all the inputs that are associated with driving at a massive scale. And I think the timing is right now, for PNG as a whole, but the superannuation funds, government, appropriate authorities, the lands ministry, our housing commission, authority, to see how best we can address housing across the country for our people. COVID has exposed that we can't have everyone together in a cluster. The people need to be separated. There's got to be that ample distancing. So housing is one, and then complementing that is, I think, opportunity to look at investments in our health infrastructure. And we know that our health infrastructure has been challenged. Fortunately, it has not seen the type of fatalities at a scale that we've seen in other countries. And again, that's probably a reflection of the resilience of what we have here. But nevertheless, we have to be prepared. So rather than just rely on the state to provide facilities for health, I think it's also opportunity for private investment in the health space. We have a few already here on the ground, but it's user pay. I think it's still find a model that can address, affordability as well as quality of health. So housing and health is, in my view, something that an opportunity for investment outside of the usual investment space.
Noted, Ian. Thank you for that comment. Ian's comment, Robin, does bring to mind the fact that BSP is heavily involved with financing new homes, and there's been a bit of a housing boom, certainly in Port Moresby in the last couple of years. We'll hear a little bit more about that at the conference tomorrow. But we've also got some subsidised loan in that area, and also some subsidised loan in the SME areas. Are you seeing much growth in that area of the market, those two areas?
In the housing market, yes, owner-occupying housing, still see ongoing demand from customers for either our first home ownership scheme at the 4% fixed rate or at our variable rate. Investment properties and people looking for investment property loans have certainly started to reduce, as you would expect, because occupancy rates, vacancy rates and rental yields have reduced in that particular sector. But seeing ongoing demand for for the first home ownership scheme product, particularly in Port Moresby, and I think Lae is getting close to being in a position where there's going to be some housing come onto the market there as well. In relation to the SMEs, the SME facility that we have, the credit enhancement scheme with the government, so far has been relatively successful. I think we've funded more than 60 million kina in loans out of the 100 million kina which the government has provided. And we do try to point out that these are funds provided in trust to provide not just a lower cost of interest, but some form of credit enhancement. And hence we are trying to manage that process with the underwriting standards to ensure that the funds are not diluted too rapidly by way of arrears or default rates which are higher than would be expected, plus at the same time ensuring that we're getting as much traction as possible with as many customers as possible. And by and large, we have been able to achieve both those objectives, which aren't necessarily mutually inclusive, hence about 60 million in funding, another 40 to 50 million in the pipeline, and the delinquency rates, albeit within the just over a 9-month period, have certainly been within the risk appetite or the tolerance levels that we'd expected when we put together the package at that 5% rate.
Noted. Final question, which I might just quickly ask each of you in turn, and then we'll be winding up this very, very valuable session indeed. So thank you all three of you for your time this morning. And my final question to each of you, and we'll start with you, Wayne, if you wouldn't mind. Next year is an election year in Papua New Guinea, and election years tend to be not without interest for all sorts of reasons. The politics gets very interesting. PNG is a very robust democracy, but it also is a time when there's debates about reform, and this Marape government has flagged, as the Prime Minister said this morning, a lot of reforms across things such as foreign direct investment, new laws for the oil and gas sector. What do you feel about the prospects for these kind of reforms coming to fruition? And what impact do you think the next election might have on the pace of that reform?
Thanks, Andrew. I think, at the outset, I mean, Papua New Guinea is a remarkable country. It's got enormous advantages and opportunities. So, as I said earlier, I think the challenge is to make it more investable, bring more security. And I think if the government can implement policies or anticipate reforms that are going to incrementally make it more investable and more stable, then that will certainly be advantageous. There's a strong focus on issues like SOE reform, and Ian talked earlier about infrastructure investment. I mean that's an opportunity to bundle up assets and make them investable and use that capital to develop businesses and fund growth. So it'll be an interesting period, and hopefully we'll see a brighter future ahead.
Yeah. Ian, your comments on that?
Yes. Well, it's about stability and continuity, and so usually elections are seen with a bit of trepidation. You wonder who is going to remain and who is going to come in. But I think overall, from a country perspective, is that if there's a continuity of policy, if there's a continuity of some stability, then it makes it easier to plan. In terms of, and I'm talking about planning from a business perspective, and what policies are going to be in place in terms of development issues, in terms of economic issues, and the likes. And then ultimately, any government's role is to ensure that the quality of life of their citizens are enhanced, if not improved. So and everything that they do, must lead to that ultimate objective. So for 2022. It's always a very interesting time. We always have a lot of contenders, putting their hands up, and then it comes down to, what is best sold to our people. But I think from a country perspective, I think from a business perspective, is that we get good leadership that can continue some of the good policies that have been introduced by this government and by the preceding government. There's a lot of good policies there, and it just needs time for those policies to be rolled out, so that we have the desired impact that we want to see. Which is about improving the lives of our people. In order to do that, you need all those enablers to work, economic and social, enablers to work. But it is what it is. Looking forward to see what the outcome rolls out. In the election, it'll be interesting. It's challenging. We have some budgetary issues, so I just want to see free and fair elections, then a government that has the interests of our people at heart, and then making policies and decisions that will improve the country, so that we make PNG a great and wonderful place to live. I know motherhood statements, but continuity and stability is what I'd like to say.
Thank you, Ian. Robin, a final word from you.
Yeah, probably along similar themes. Elections come every 5 years, so we know what's coming. From a business perspective, from a government perspective, you just don't want the election to get in the way of the government's business of doing business, nor do you want it to get in the way of the private sector's business of doing business, which translated means we've got a couple of key projects which do need to get finalised. There's going to be a trip to the States to try to get Pinyang finalised, getting Total finalised, and getting Wafi Golpu finalised before the election, so that then there's continuity and certainty that we don't get to between April and August, and there's this logjam of decisions which haven't been made. And the same then applies with the SOEs. Don't let the election get in the way of what you're charged and responsible for ensuring gets undertaken, which is complete those power electrification projects, which are being sponsored and supported by multilaterals, including the Australian government, getting telecommunications out there reliably and effective, and to ensure that business is able to maintain continuity. Election will come in June, July, but we just want normal activity to continue, get a couple of these key resource projects signed off, so we can look forward to confidence in 2022 and beyond.